Now, during my time in NIAV, definitely there's going to be a lot of people. One particular thing that I actually noticed was that 6 to 7 out of 10 people, all of them that tried on any IEMs that I saw that day, uses this thing, the Cayenne RU6. What makes this thing so special? Let's talk about it. Now, the Cayenne RU6 back then was like, literally neck and neck, sort of like Android versus iOS between this and the M15. My friend bought this, Wang bought this, my business partner of Not Brand bought this, follow us please. This is a so-called R2R DAC, which basically uses almost everything that is analog. None of it is digital compared to what you are mostly associated with right now, a Delta Sigma DAC. Now, without going into any detail on how these two things work, I'm just here to talk about how they sound. In general, when we're talking about R2R, mainly we associate them more with a so-called analog characteristic. Compared to, a Delta Sigma DAC, your choices are basically limitless. But without actually leaving the topic, let's just talk about the Cayenne RU6 right here. This is retail back then for $250 US, literally the same price as the M15. And long story short, my friend got this and I was like, you know what, let me just get the M15 and let's compare. Now, the Cayenne RU6 retails at $250 US, but currently right now you could easily find them in the secondhand market for almost half the price. So, just go on and scour any worthwhile bargains if you actually want a pair. Because this thing, as of 2024 right now, as I'm filming this, it still stands the test of time quite well. And the few pros comparing this to the M15 is, first of all, it has volume buttons. So, you can directly control your volumes. And second of all, it has a screen. Makes it easier for you to know what volume you're on. And it also has another oversampling filter compared to the M15, which only has a high gain, low gain switch, which this thing already has it. But other than that, oh yeah, one more thing. The Cayenne RU6 also gives you a free iPhone cable. Now, this thing, the M15 doesn't have it back then, but right now, from what I know, the M15i probably gives it to people. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, let's just talk about how this thing actually affects your IEM's listening experience. Now, in general, the Cayenne RU6 DAC is so-called an R2R DAC, and we will already expect it to have some analog characteristics. But in general, it basically warms up the bass region. Mids might be touched on a little bit, but for the mids and up, mainly it is more on smoothing everything out. Without making things sound blurry, it just smooths things out, but at the same time still maintains any sort of crispiness that your IEMs could have. Now, before we begin, just want to mention one thing regarding the oversampling filter. The oversampling samples it up to 384, and from what I could test, when you open oversampling, bass region's gonna be less, and your mids and trebles are gonna go a little bit higher and more forward. That's about it. Other than that, not really that much. Basically, think of something that goes from a V-shaped type of bass to a more balanced type of shape. Decrease in amplitude. That's what I could feel. But other than that, the bass characteristics in general will be coated with a significant amount of warmth. It sounds more thick and bodied overall. And the analog texture is, definitely a feature. If I were to actually say something more specific, maybe something along the lines of like some very basic type of tube amps, those type of feelings, those type of colored sounds. Definitely some other notable things that I've noticed when I was listening to this, when I was listening to my IEMs using this, you could feel like kicks and 808s overall might sound more bouncy. It changes in terms of its extensions. And overall, other characteristics of the bass that I noticed is that, first of all, 808s and kicks, anything that has that thumpiness, it changes a little bit characteristically in terms of, first of all, having slightly more extension, having slightly less transients, which basically means that it is not as fast as tight. It is more loosened up than being rigid, but think of that as a feature, not a flaw. It makes everything sounds more dynamic. And for some reason, even though, like I said, transients are transients, this thing has less of it, but when you're listening to any bass licks, it somehow feels very, very clear. Definitely a plus when you're listening to certain songs with good bass licks. Moving on to the mids, the vocal region I would overall say is a little bit back, a little bit more recessed than what I would want compared to the M15, but it's just a minor nitpick from me personally. This is more subjective than objective. So basically, if you have an M15, just remember this thing is just ever so slightly back. That's it. And comparing that to the M15, which is more transparent, this thing is definitely having a more colored flavor to it. And in terms of the vocals, male might sound a little bit more warm considering that there are, the spectrum is closer to the bass region. But regardless of that, male and female vocals sound more weighty. They have more weight to it. Everything sounds more mature and ever so slightly warm. Mids in general, again, the most common words that I could think of is, laid back, smooth, and thick, with 3 C's. Overall, everything just sounds very, very nice in terms of its harmonics, in terms of its overtones that accompany the macro detail. And specifically, I like it during things that has synths and keys specifically. I don't know why, but strings just have extension. That is already good. But for, specifically synths and keys, you can feel like it's enhanced in terms of having more harmonics and, more overtones. I don't know how to explain this, but that's how I feel when I'm listening to the RU6. And moving on to the treble, overall, despite the fact that it has some slight warmness to it, it does not color that much on the treble. Things that are crisp still sounds crisp, just like it just has a very small duck. For people who know mixing, y'all definitely know the duck thing. During like the most peakiest moments, you could definitely hear like there's some slight ducking of it. Basically, like, it's just smoothing out all the edges. Things that sound sharp just has the edge sanded out just ever so slightly to make it not have that peakiness, not that sibilance. But other than that, everything is same. Again, things sound more bodied, despite it being a hat, despite it being a ride, a snare. Everything just has weight to it more. And overall, everything has that level of good extension and decay. It might not sound too airy for the RU6 considering that this thing is, supposedly colored towards the warmish side, but you could definitely feel like, the warmness has an atmosphere in itself. It has an ambiance in itself. And for technicalities, definitely, I would say more or less dynamics and soundstage, it is just on par with the M15. Nothing really stands out above these two because, in their weight class, these two are already quite good. RU6, things that I personally noticed that are slightly better is, first of all, the staging might be ever so slightly wider due to its analog characteristics. You can feel like during a track when there's bass regions, when it is at the back, everything will sound slightly more spacious. It has more reach. So you can feel like things are more deep overall in that track. And in terms of soundstage and imaging is not going to be exactly as pinpoint as Quest style M15. It might be slightly less. You will not be faltered by its so-called, slightly less pinpointy accuracy because everything still has a definitive border. Overall, the separation is still being done quite well. And if not, I would say maybe ever so slightly better than the M15 because you could feel like the borders between one thing and the other are being separated ever so slightly further. And definitely one more thing that I've mentioned just now in the mids part is definitely detail retrieval. In terms of detail retrieval, definitely this is not going to be as technical as other DACs. This is supposed to be a DAC that is more catered towards enjoyment. It is more musical than technical or analytical. So overall, you can feel like the enhancement of most overtones is just the right amount, just to keep you going, just to keep you more immersed. You will never feel like this thing has less stuff unless you're comparing it directly to something like the Kensei or the M15. Because this thing is supposed to make you enjoy music rather than to be, a detail whore or be like me, some guy who really likes neutrality. Micro details are still there. It's just not as prominent or, being brought forward as direct as the M15. Nevertheless, the M15 doesn't have this level of, very delicious, very luscious levels of overtones and harmonics in the mids. This thing overall is very, very enjoyable when we're talking about mids specifically. The M15, I like this because, I really enjoy vocals more. But this thing, if I just want to relax, I really don't want to be analytical about anything, this thing is my to-go DAC for this price point. So you could say, this is basically one of those blue pill, red pill moments. You want to be a detail whore, or do you just want to be brain dead and just relax? And anyways, that's probably it for this video. Sorry it's going to be a little bit rushed because I'm in the middle of something. But anyways, thanks for watching this video. Hopefully y'all have an insight in terms of what to get for, you know, DACs of this price point, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.